Hi, I'm Gabby, and welcome to a rather personal episode of the Happier Life Project podcast, brought to you by My Possible Self, the free, award-winning mental health and wellness app. Now, if you're listening to this episode the week it comes out, I am currently in the midst of doing my second round of egg freezing. It's a journey that's emotionally and physically rather demanding, and frankly, not talked about enough. Egg freezing is a way to preserve fertility, giving women the option to try for children later in life. The process is identical to IVF, except instead of fertilising the eggs immediately after retrieval, they're frozen and stored for potential future use. It's an option more and more people are considering as delayed parenthood becomes increasingly common. For some, egg freezing is about delaying parenthood, whereas for others, both IVF and egg freezing is in the hope of overcoming infertility. According to the World Health Organization, 1 in 6 people of reproductive age globally experience infertility. That's around 17.5% of the population. And for those who go down the assisted reproductive route, which of course also includes same-sex couples, the journey is far from simple. Whether it's IVF or egg freezing, it can take a significant toll, not just physically, but mentally, emotionally, and significantly, financially. Anxiety, depression, body image struggles, relationship challenges, and social isolation are just some of the hurdles that might show up. Because this is such a deeply personal story, I wanted somebody that I know and trust to guide me through sharing it. So I asked Chlo Hodgkinson, who you may remember from a previous episode of the podcast, and who also runs the My Possible Self socials, to take the interviewer's seat. Together, we dive into the realities of egg freezing, the process, the emotional highs and lows, the strain it takes on the body, and the impact on mental health. We also talk about my different experiences at 2 separate clinics, why I was so certain that this was the right choice for me, and why researching clinics is so important. My hope is that by opening up, I can shed light on what it's really like and help anybody considering this path to feel a little bit more informed and a little bit less alone. So, ready to find a healthier, happier you? Let's get started.
Gabby, you are used to being in my seat talking to the experts, but today you are the expert because you are literally living and breathing it, right? You are going through this journey of freezing your eggs. Can you tell me, how did you get to that decision? Let's take me right back.
Okay. Well, to be honest with you, Chlo, it was a voice in my head that it wouldn't go away. So before I started this journey, I've always been quite career focused, I suppose. And my career's taken me, to different parts of the world. And I just never really met anybody that I, ended up settling down with. And then the years go by. And then, like I said, there was this voice in my head because I love kids. I really, really do. And it's not necessarily the fact as well of like, some women are like, I have to have kids and that's it. And, life will be over if I don't. And I've failed as a woman and all that. For me, it wasn't that at all. But it was like, I don't want to close the door. And for men, they can just be a father when they're 60 or 70, or like Al Pacino in his 80s and Robert De Niro. But for women, obviously, they can't do that unless they take the necessary steps. And so I started looking into it, and I thought it was really interesting as well that women can actually carry a child and give birth after menopause. But the most important part is the eggs and the egg quality. And you probably know yourself that women are born with the amount of eggs that they've got when they arrive on the earth. And I guess, to say the cliche, the clock was ticking. I hadn't met anybody that I was going to do it the traditional way with. And for years, it was that voice in my head. A barrier for me was financial, especially because when I started thinking about it, I was living and working in America. So the costs were really high. But it was a voice that just wouldn't go away. So that's how it all began.
I just made a note there. Can you take me back to that cliche saying that you said that the time is ticking?
Yeah.
How do you feel when you have that voice? Because we are bombarded with that, aren't we? I don't know about you, but throughout school, it was do not have sex, otherwise you will get pregnant. But then now I'm sort of like through school stage, it feels like you're bombarded with a very, like, it's the opposite of the message. It's like, hurry up, otherwise the time is ticking. And that, I don't know, that saying feels really uncomfortable. Yeah. How does it feel for you?
It's not nice. It's really not nice. And then you see your friends and colleagues having kids around you, and it's quite a mixed feeling, because like you're so happy for them, but it's also like, when's it going to be my turn? Is it going to be my turn? Yeah. And then you start to, well, for me personally, you start to become more sensitive to things like, I was listening on one of my favorite podcasts the other day, and it was a comedy podcast, but one of the women was basically saying that men are attracted to fertility. And that's why men tend to gravitate towards like fancying women that are slightly younger. And it's like women that are in the fertile years. And so it is all this kind of like messaging that as you age as a woman, then, you know, you're going to end up on the shelf, and you failed if you've not had a child. And I did a lot of work, though, to kind of look into that and be like, well, is it that I just feel that like I won't be fulfilling my destiny as a woman if I don't have children? And then I thought, no, that's bollocks, because I know better than that, especially from working for my possible self and doing this pod. I do know that, but I suppose it's that maternal instinct, which I definitely have with kids. You know, kids are my happy place and stuff. So yeah, so there's that sort of, you know, being around children and feeling at peace and feeling like, yeah, this just feels so natural, and it's always been so natural. But then that pressure of like, yes, but you know, your body is only got X amount of years where you can do this, and the longer you leave it, the less chance you're gonna succeed in having a child the traditional way.
So what are your goals with freezing your eggs?
Mm-hmm. First of all, to quieten the voice and quieten the clock, I think, and just take that pressure off my shoulders. So most doctors that you speak to will say you need 20 eggs really to give yourself the best shot. Now, if you're freezing your eggs and you're not doing IVF straight away, then 85% of those eggs will be viable to go to the next round, which is like fertilizing them with the sperm, I suppose, and then doing the next stage of the IVF. If you're kind of delaying that, because like my doctor, who I've got this time round, who is just great, I love her. She said, I feel like you are still a bit of a romantic and you're holding out for doing it with somebody that's going to be your partner versus going down the sperm donor route, which was something I looked at as well. But I did start to freak out about doing it right now. And again, the financial cost of it was considerably more. And I just thought, I'm not ready. But, you know, I've not got that many years left statistically. So, yeah, for me, the egg freezing is to just give myself a chance to breathe and to know that, because the eggs, obviously, when they've been taken and frozen, they stay the age that they are. So because now I live in Portugal, you've got up until the age of 50 where legally you can then go through IVF or unfreeze your eggs, and they'll do the process. They say after 50, they think you'll be too old as a mother. That's right. The kind of laws over here. So that for me, I'm like, it gives me a very nice window, you know, where I've got time to work on my career a little bit. And, I am in a relationship now, and we can sort of see how that goes. But like, just to take the goddamn pressure off.
Yeah, and I think as well, when we are in the year, we're 2025, and if these opportunities are there for us, then great, right? You mentioned that you were now going through your second round in Portugal. Can you take us right back? So you've told us, you decided to give this a go, and you started researching this to give yourself a bit of a deep breath, really, and to take the pressure off. So what was the next stages if someone was interested in doing this? Because I feel like I'm around a lot of career-driven females and that possibly are in the same boat. And I'm sure there are hundreds, thousands of women in this boat that, we've been so empowered to chase our careers, and so we blimmin' should.
Yeah.
But sometimes we're, unfortunately for females, there is often a catch, which, like you said, guys don't really have that catch, do they?
No.
So if someone was interested in going down this route, which I think is so empowering for you, isn't it? Where do we start?
Yeah. Well, first and foremost, do your homework. I wish I'd have gone back in time and researched more into the clinic that I was going to go with. And it sounds so obvious, but I basically went with, because I was living in the UK, what is the best in the Northwest because of the area that I live. And it was a clinic in Manchester, and it just kept coming up and up and up and up and up. And it was like, I didn't look further afield because I thought, well, I know there's going to be visits to the clinic. I wanted to be in the vicinity of, so I could access it easily. And actually, I wish now maybe I hadn't have necessarily jumped to that conclusion. They were all very nice, but I will say that it is a money-making machine. And this is the really ugly side of it. And I do think there is massive corporations that are just, and I'm not just talking about the UK, I'm talking globally, that are preying on vulnerable women and men that want to become parents, and they are jacking up the prices as well. And I know this firsthand because of what it's costing me here in Lisbon and the treatment I'm getting here in Lisbon versus in Manchester. And I also really don't like it when people start criticizing you for not doing it soon enough. I'll try not to get into too much of a rant, but I'm like, well, if you just got $6,000, in your bank account that you can just click your fingers and do it. Or, we actually had a guest on the podcast that, and this is years back, but she was a gynecologist, and I really didn't appreciate the fact that she was like, well, it's just the facts that women just need to have kids younger. And she was saying it like it was almost like your fault if you it didn't. And I thought, well, okay, you found your person and you managed to have children and keep your career and stuff. But like a lot of women just don't have that at their fingertips,
And sometimes it's like the awareness as well, isn't it? Right. Like life's like, and when you're down a path and, like you say, like you weren't in a position, you weren't thinking about children, and if you weren't with a partner that suddenly those conversations started happening, obviously, we're thinking about the next contract we're signing.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And I think anybody who's responsible enough to think about having a child thinks about how you're going to provide for the child. It's not just the fact of actually having one. You know yourself all too well. It's like putting a roof over the head and clothes on the back and then school. And then, it's not exactly like just getting a pet cat, is it? So yeah, that there are many factors. And I feel like my advice to anybody that, especially if they are at a position now to do it, but they weren't when they were like 30, advocate for yourself more, because I think these people can very much just be like, well, this is the way it is. And, they can almost be quite, that this was the feeling I got a little bit about it, but very black and white. And it's not black and white. And it's like every female's body isn't the same based on their age. There are so many different factors, like biologically and lifestyle factors and all these different things. Like I just don't think it's so black and white, basically.
And what made you go through it the second time? talk to me about that sort of first time and then moving into the second time.
Yeah. So the first time around I did it, and like I touched upon, they say, like, in order to give yourself the best possible chance down the line, they want to get 20 eggs. And when I went for my scans, because when you go for your scan, you start the hormone injections, you do them every day. And then every few days you go for a scan. And this is to see how big the follicles are getting that are holding the eggs, because they have to be a certain size to retrieve the eggs. And when I was going for my scans, it was all very positive, like, 18, 20. And then you have what's called the trigger injection. And then that's when you go in and you have the procedure. And then in the UK, at least, I'm not sure about over here in Portugal. I assume it's the same, but I had to have somebody to come with me when I went through the procedure. So I took my mum, and then they said, right, we'll call you in about an hour and we'll let you know how many eggs you've got and what are the next steps or whatever. I was really whacked out on the drugs that they gave me. Like, they said, some people fall asleep, some people don't. I think it's local anesthetic where they're not putting you to sleep, but it was certainly enough that my last words to the team were, "Oh, Glastonbury Festival starts today."
Brilliant.
Yeah. And then the next thing I know, I'm like being wheeled back into the room and my mum's there. So yeah, I was really, really dopey. And then I remember going home, and it was about an hour drive from the clinic. And then I get the phone call, and then they said to me, right, we collected 10, but it was either 6 or 7 were mature enough to freeze. And I was like, oh, okay. And I was expecting more because of like the size of my eggs, the follicles, and what the scans were showing. I was like, oh, okay. And I was still, like I said, quite dopey and whatever. And then straight away, the lady was right on me, like going, yeah, we need to book you in for another round. And I just literally saved up what ended up being over £6,000, probably more towards 7, to do this first round. I've gone through this procedure. It does take its toll emotionally and physically to pump your body full of these hormones. I'd not even got a chance to digest what they'd said. And then it was like, we want more money off you for another round, otherwise it's not going to work. Or it just felt very much like, whoa. So that's kind of where I stopped with that clinic.
What's happened to those eggs now?
They're still in Manchester.
I picture like you having like 7 or 8 little kids.
Little Gabby eggs. Yeah, little Gabby eggs.
Yeah.
So with this clinic in Manchester, I think, which is quite common, you get a free year of like contained storage. Thank you. Yeah. And so then after your first year, it's about £400 a year to store them. Yeah. And
God, Gabby, we are in the wrong business, aren't we?
I know. Well, this is the thing. And then over here, Chlo, you get 5 years storage, and then to pay for another 5 years, it's basically the same amount as it is for 1 year in the UK. But we can talk a bit about how dramatically cheaper it's been for me to do it over here as well. But yeah, currently those eggs are still in Manchester. But what I am going to do, because I don't really want to pay this clinic in Manchester another £400 for a year, when I can, there are services that can transport your eggs.
This is brilliant. I literally picture like mini Gabby eggs on a flight.
Oh yeah. Well, that's it. Making the way to Lisbon to join the eggs that we take this time round. It'll be interesting because it'll be nearly 2 years later. So, and I'm on different drugs as well this time round. This is like 2 different hormones mixed together. It will be interesting to see how many I get this time. Yeah. Can
we talk about how you've coped with this whole journey? It's one thing being accepting that maybe you're in this position anyway and coming to terms with it, right? But then, like you said earlier, like the physical demands, then also the financial demands, then also coming out of surgery and feeling like you're pressured to spend more money. Exactly. And then you also touched on about how much better your doctor is in Portugal. How? Like, can we talk? Yeah. How do you deal with that emotionally?
Yoga. again, it goes back to that voice, call it intuition or your gut or whatever. When I looked into this clinic in Lisbon, and I was actually talking, I met a couple of like nice girls that just at like parties and barbecues and stuff here, and they were all talking about the same clinic. And I was like, oh, yeah, I've done a little bit of research and stuff. And I just kind of thought, all right, well, there's no harm in me like meeting them and just having a consultation and just sort of seeing what my options are and whatever. And I just really like gelled with the doctor that I've got. She's great. She doesn't sugarcoat anything, but she's also really positive. And I think that was what was missing. She understands about financial restrictions and what it costs over here. And this is why I know, and it makes me so mad about how much inflation these clinics put on the medication and the procedure itself, is because Lisbon isn't a cheap place. Everybody thinks, oh, Portugal's cheaper and stuff. Well, now because it's becoming so popular, especially the capital, you couldn't say, well, their overheads are less. They're not. Because I've got insurance here, like health insurance, 90% of my medication was covered. So basically, for about £120, that's what my medication itself has cost. Versus if I was in England, I would imagine what they would charge me was about £3,000. So you're talking 120 quid or £3,000. And this is what makes me so mad because it's like you're really taking advantage of vulnerable people. Now I know how much, because the medication is provided on the health service or whatever. Why can that not be the same for the NHS? You know, it's just like, it's not fair. It's really not fair. What it cost me in the UK, I could have had 2 rounds in Portugal and then some.
How has this affected your mental health, this whole journey?
Well, I think when I did the first round, I thought, well, at least I've got 6 or 7. So it somewhat took me like a bit of the pressure off. But then talking to the doctor here, and she was like, look, if you're going to do it and you can do it right, give yourself the best shot. And it is, you know, to go for 20 eggs. Financially, I don't know, honestly, if I'll do another round. Well, certainly this year I won't. Let's see how things pan out this time round. I just didn't want to close the door. And I also thought this was really cool. My doctor said, look, you know, being a mum doesn't just mean carrying a child. There are other routes. And I'm not open to adopting, say, but I know also in Portugal, that's really, really hard too. I just kind of feel at this stage that it's like something that I have to do. It's, you know, it's just, I really wanted to go to Bali. I wanted to go on holiday this year. And it was like Bali or freezing my eggs. Can't do both. I'm just going with my gut on this and thinking, this is what I have to do. I can't do it to the level I'd like to do it maybe, because then I would just knock out another round. Even though it's not pleasant, I'm not going to lie. The first time I did it, nobody told you about the weight gain. That was a not pleasant surprise. Yeah, and just like when the follicles are beefing up and growing, it's like it feels you can get quite sore because you're injecting yourself so much and your stomach's swelling. And I mean, God, I know we'll continue on to like actual pregnancy on the episode after this with you. But I did start to get like weird cravings for foods that I just wouldn't usually eat in a million years, you know.
Hormones are wild, aren't they? Hormones are just, oh God, if there's one thing I wish everyone just accepted and understood was the fact that we are wild because of our hormones. And then if you're injecting obviously more hormones into you for a procedure, expect to be more wild.
Yeah, well, this is why I sound so nasally and I'm like really run down as well. It's because like the doctor said to me, when you're injecting yourself with these hormones, then your immune system does take a bit of a knock and you are more susceptible to picking things up as well. So
did you see any like emotional differences? Because, you know, as more and more people, me especially, waving the flag for female health and talking about hormones and female, like the female cycle, obviously like pregnancy hormones are wild, period hormones are wild. If you're injecting, did you experience anything emotionally?
A lot of women do, but for me, fatigue has been my biggest thing. Like, just absolutely drained. Yeah, the first time round, and I can feel it starting to creep in this time round as well. But like, I feel quite steady. Honestly, I feel quite steady. I feel quite serene with it. So it almost feels like I'm making the right decision.
Yeah. So a therapist once told me that when you're making a decision from the soul, your voice is really low and slow and calm. And when you're making like a decision from the head, you're often like quite scatty and very high pitched and really fast with it. And when you talk about your journey, you're very low, very slow, very calm. It feels like such a centered choice. And I think that's really key, isn't it, in this whole journey, is that, you know, we spoke about earlier about how you can have the pressures from the outside world, and often that can lead you to being in a vulnerable position, which leads you to making choices, which then, you know, if you're just coming out of a drug-fueled procedure, you're then more vulnerable, and then you're more inclined to make these decisions. And I think I guess for someone that's maybe thinking about this journey or maybe is on this journey, do you have any tips for them in like how to make sure that they're making the decision that's right for them, and not because they've been so influenced by potentially a company that's making a load of money or outside sort of like society?
Yeah, because I remember as well, like my mum would also, with any boyfriend I had, it was like, oh, you better get cracking. And it was that, you know, the flippant comments where it does add to that pressure. And it is really, you need to distinguish whose voice am I listening to? Like, is it that of my mum's or my best friends or social medias, or is it mine? I mean, a lot of women sort of get scared around or daunted by the fact of becoming a mum or like raising a child. And I don't know, maybe because I'm the oldest in my family and I've always been the babysitter or whatever, but I've never doubted that I could do it and that I would be a good mum. It's just something that I feel just so sure about. But life has just dealt me a different card where I've not met that person to do it naturally. I've not been financially able to do it when they say you should do it, which is like early 30s, I think, something like that. It's taken me more time, but like I found it was really interesting. My friend said to me, because she went through her journey's terrible. Her and her husband still might make great parents. They had the money to go through lots of rounds of IVF, and it turned out nobody checked the guy because they were like, oh, your eggs are great and whatever. And now she has to have a screening every year because she's done that much IVF. She's more susceptible to a certain type of cancer. Nobody checked the guy until whatever, the last round or whatever. And it turns out it was something that was quite fixable. So they went through all of this heartache, actually. Like they say, it takes two to tango. But she said to me, because she looked at clinics all over the place, basically, because as you get older, some clinics won't take you. And she said, in terms of with the age thing, that's because like some clinics don't want it to screw up with their success rate statistics. So they won't even touch you. So I would say to anybody listening, honestly, do your homework, and actually, like, maybe it is worth the travel. Because, for example, with my clinic here in Lisbon, you might think, well, I'm listening and I live in the UK. Because I even said to my sister, because she's about to start her IVF journey. And I said, you should really look at this clinic. And she was like, yeah, but you know, what am I going to do for appointments to come over or whatever? And like the ultrasound to check the follicles are growing and whatnot. And because I'm English, and when I phoned up to make my appointment, they assumed that I was still in England, like I was speaking to a different person. She thought that basically I would be going for my scan in England and they could just send that to the doctor in Lisbon. So I think there is more flexibility than we even know, and we don't know to ask the questions. You know, I do think that like maybe some places you might be able to do some payment schemes as well. If finances are an obstacle, if this is something you genuinely really want, just explore every possible avenue. Yeah.
And what are some of the things you mentioned? Yoga, but so someone's listened to all of this, they're like, yeah, this is right for me. What advice would you give someone to enable to protect their mental health and to help them through it? Do you have any tips for someone that's about to do the journey?
Well, first of all, I'd say to anybody even thinking about it, start with the supplements, start taking folic acid. Don't just necessarily take what's on the box as well, because actually when you are getting ready to conceive or to freeze your eggs, then they will suggest you take more than what you would just if you go into your local Boots or whatever to pick up your supplements. So I would look at some credible websites to see how much of folic acid you can take. There's the ways you can prep your body to give yourself the best possible chance in advance. Vitamin D is another one as well that my doctor prescribed to me. And then Q10 is another one. So I would say like lower your stress levels. It really does matter. That's why with me, yoga helps. Getting the rest and looking after your body and almost like getting yourself in that kind of, because I think this is why, like my sister's 5 years younger than me, and I think that's why she's struggled, is because she has a very stressful job and she's living on sort of high stress, and it's not cultivating that kind of nurturing, safe space for a baby to bloom and grow and all of that stuff. So I think like getting yourself ready physically will help you mentally. It does sound really a bit hippie or whatever, but I do think just listen to your gut and listen to like, I think like visualization as well. Can you see yourself generally with kids and like, why do I want kids? Like, why?
Okay, let's take you to where you're at now.
Mm-hmm.
Has your opinion on fertility, this whole journey changed from when you first started?
I've been quite empowered, even just being in these clinics and seeing other women. My doctor, I find really inspiring, who's a woman. She's very like pro women, you know, there's that kind of camaraderie side of it. I just wish it was more accessible for all women. I like in some countries, you can get it done through the healthcare service. So the women, as you know, they can have a career and stuff. And I just wish that there was more resources available so that it didn't have to like completely drain you financially. And again, that's why I do think it's worth looking at maybe traveling abroad. If the clinic has really good success rates, if you're maybe somebody that might be a bit older, so that might be where you might need more than one round as well, because that wasn't disclosed to me ahead of time either, that like, oh, actually, this is just the tip of the iceberg potentially in what you are going to spend. And now I've learned as well, I don't want to know how much this is and then how much this is. I'm like, tell me the total amount. I've learned to be a lot more like direct, because I do think people like mince around a little bit because it is so costly. Like I had additional injections needed in the first round, and that was just an extra 500 quid here and then another, you know, like I can just like click my fingers and pull it out of the sky. And it's like, no, I want to know in advance actually, like what the meds, what's the cost of the treatment, what's the cost of the storage, will there be any additional costs potentially that I need to know about? Like, that's what I've learned.
Yeah. And Gabby, like, this is where I'm joining you in the frustration, right? We have no information, very, very limited information about female health as it is. Like in general, we know very little about the female body. You know, any sort of test done on like on fitness is all done on men, barely on women. We're only now just finding out that women shouldn't be treated like men, right? Yeah. Our whole bodies are so different. But then you add in the fact that there's all of these fertility journeys that you can go on, which is fantastic. I am so on board with the fact that we get that opportunity. But don't you just find that it creates a bigger gap between the privilege as well?
Yeah.
Like, this whole journey has been such a roller coaster for you. And it's so amazing that you can go on this journey, yet still female health and female empowerment has a restriction.
Yeah. And like, I would say as well, to add to that, if somebody sounds a bit patronizing on the phone, then don't pursue it with them, you know, because I had that as well. And that was actually through the NHS, because I read somewhere that like same-sex parents or, you know, wannabe parents or single mums could now be entitled to IVF X amount of rounds on the NHS. And the guy I spoke to, after waiting 6 weeks or so for an appointment, I had to get it referred from my doctor. He was so patronizing. And then straight away it went from, oh no, that was just something that was suggested. And I read it on like somewhere in the NHS sphere online from a credible source. So I thought, but he really like poo-pooed me. And then again was straight in with but we do it private. And then he was like, follow up with this email and then we'll do the cost list and stuff. And it was just like, do you know what? No, thank you.
Yeah. Where are you now then? How are you feeling about the second round?
Yeah.
Where are you at?
Well, I had a scan today, and so they are beefing up nicely. No. I'm hopeful that I get enough that it makes me feel like, right, okay, now I can just like get on with my life a little bit and then just sort of see how things unfold. So I'm feeling cautiously optimistic, I suppose. I mean, there has to be a certain point as well where you just have to let things be as they're going to be. And it's crossed.
Gabby, thank you so much for sharing your journey, because it's a whole journey for you anyway, isn't it? And I just think you sharing and being so open and honest about your experiences in the UK, having to go through a second round, all of these ups and downs that you've gone through is so reassuring, but also educational for people, because we don't know that these things are going on enough. So thank you so much. Now I'm going to keep you in the interviewee seat and keep you with the Happier Life Project's last 5 in 5, as you always do. Does it feel weird being on the other side?
Oh, I've been dying to answer these questions myself. So thank you. Yeah, it's our signature sign off, the same 5 questions that usually I ask every guest to conclude the episode, but I've never had the opportunity to answer them yet. So
yay! Here we go then. So Gabby, number 1, when and where are you at your happiest?
It's got to be with my nieces and nephew, honestly, with the kiddos again, you know, they are my happy place. It's pure joy and nothing else.
Love it. What's your favorite thing to do that nourishes your mental health?
It's yoga. Yoga for me is it's been a game changer.
Love it. What piece of advice do you now know that you wish someone would have told you earlier that would have made you a happier person?
Ooh. Oh my God, I don't know how to answer this question, and I wrote the question. Don't sweat the small stuff. I'm just going to fire out a cliche.
Nice. What is the most important one thing that needs to change to make the world a happier place?
I'm going to say more compassion. You know, it applies to so much, including what we were talking about today. I think treating people with compassion hopefully would make the world a happier place.
Absolutely. And finally, what is a simple, actionable first step we can take when it comes to making empowered decisions about fertility that will help us on our mission to building a happier life?
Do your homework, ask around, speak to other people, speak to people going through it as much as people from different clinics, and just, I suppose, take some time to go inwards to just be really sure if you're going to do this, whether it's with a partner or whether it's as a solo parent, you know, why am I doing it? And just go for it. Yeah.
Gabby, thank you so much for being so open and honest. This has been so educational and insightful. And good luck on the rest of your journey. You'll have to keep us updated on how it all goes.
Yes, if anybody wants to like message me or whatever, just to, ask more information or find out how many eggs I ended up with.
Yeah, stay tuned, guys. On the My Possible Self Instagram, we'll release it. How many little Gabbies are in a little container somewhere?
Yeah, like a little egg box, like with all the little eggs. Thank you, Chlo. I'm going to be out of a job. You absolutely smashed it. Thank you so much for a great interview.
Hey, that was great. I loved it. That was so insightful as well.
It's Gabby back here. Thank you again, Chlo. You did do such an incredible job, and I actually really enjoyed talking to you and sharing my story. And as we continue exploring the maternal journey next week, just in time for Mother's Day, we're switching back seats again. I'll be interviewing Chlo all about her experience as a new mum from pregnancy to parenthood. It's a conversation you won't want to miss. Just a couple of quick points before I run through the important housekeeping. Listening back to that interview, I made a couple of notes about things I wanted to clarify. One was when I talk about my friend who went through numerous rounds of IVF, and I said she has to be screened every year for a certain type of cancer. It's breast cancer, and it's actually every 6 months. When I talked about the impact of stress on fertility, it's unlikely that stress alone can cause infertility, but stress does interfere with a woman's ability to get pregnant. Lots of research has shown that women with a history of depression are twice as likely to experience infertility, and anxiety can also prolong the time needed to achieve pregnancy. So however you are going down the fertility route, if you're listening to this and maybe you're trying to get pregnant naturally, maybe you want to freeze your eggs like I'm doing, maybe you're about to embark on IVF, do look at your stress levels. And finally, I did pick up on the fact that I kind of skirted around answering Chlo's question. A couple of times she pushed me to talk about what was my mental health like during this whole process, and my emotional state as well. And I still stand by what I was basically getting at, which was I'm very calm, I'm very centered, I'm very sure of my decision. But I will say now, as it's a few days later since Chloe interviewed me, and I've been taking more of the hormone injections, and now I'm also taking the injection that suspends ovulation while my follicles are still beefing up. I'm on a very high dosage, and my mental health is still absolutely fine, but physically I am very, very fatigued. I also last night was starting to feel quite nauseous, and I was talking to a friend who's also gone through it, and she said, yeah, you just kind of feel like meh. So I'm sharing that just in case anybody else might be feeling the same way. And if you are struggling with your mental health, there is a crisis button on the My Possible Self app, which will signpost you to the correct information for immediate expert advice. Those of you who are listening on one of the podcast platforms, the My Possible Self app is completely free to download, so you don't need to worry about it costing you anything. If you are in crisis or you think you may have an emergency, please do call your doctor or the emergency services immediately. The views expressed in this podcast are solely those of the interviewer, which is Chloe, and the interviewee, which was me. The content of this podcast is for informational and educational purposes only and should not be considered as a substitute for professional or medical advice. Our partners at the Priory Healthcare are not involved in the production or content of this podcast. Please do leave a review if you found this episode helpful, and to find and follow us on social media, we're most active on Instagram and we're at My Possible Self, and I've been at Radio Gabby. Do take care, and I'll see you on the next one. Bye for now.